The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents, What Books Should I Read? I've avoided doing this video for years, despite the fact that it's one of the most common questions that I get. Hey, what books should I read? And for some of the people who are asking this, they're wanting to figure out, hey, I want to be able to argue the way you do. I want to be able to think the way you do. What books did you read? What books do you think I should read in order to be able to do what you do? And I appreciate that anybody would want to emulate me, although the recommendation that I give is to keep watching the debates and the videos that I put out, because that's the whole point. Is I'm trying to show people how I think, not just so that someone can emulate it or be like me, but so that if I'm in fact incorrect, someone can point it out. But if I am correct and there's a way to do it or a better way, that we can all share it and people can learn from me in the way I've learned from others. So some disclaimers to start this off. This is by no means an exhaustive list of books that I think anyone should read. As a matter of fact, I could probably take every one of these books and throw it off to the side and go downstairs to my library and grab 20 more books, and it would still be a good list. There's one book that I recommend all the time, and oddly, I recommend it so much, I don't have a copy here with me myself. I've loaned out my copy. I cannot recall to who. I'm probably going to have to buy a new copy. I'm probably going to buy a couple copies. That book is called Innumeracy, Innumeracy, and it's by John Allen Paulos. And it is basically has nothing to do with religion, although he did write a follow-up book about religion. But this book is about how we're all bad with math and about lying with statistics and how our intuitions about quantities and relative sizes of things is just wrong. And when you take a test that has a 98% accuracy, what does that actually mean if it's like a medical test? And how many people in 100 are going to test positive? What false positives, false negatives? It's an outstanding book. It's the book I recommend more than any other. The rest of these I actually have copies of here, and they're not all what you expected. This one, though, is Patrick J. Hurley's Concise Introduction to Logic. It's actually a textbook used by many colleges that is a primer in logic, logical arguments, syllogisms, structures, truth tables. It is probably, there may be better books that I haven't read on the subject, but if you're just wanting to learn the basics of logic, this is probably the best place to start. For people who are looking more conversationally, the book that I almost always recommend is called Informal Logic by Douglas N. Walton. It's a handbook for critical argumentation. It is designed so that it's not so much a textbook with actual questions and answers and solving. This is for everybody. And it is really good because one of the most difficult things about having these sorts of arguments, having these sorts of discussions, is that if something is in a strict syllogistic format, premise one, premise two, conclusion, it's a lot easier to analyze than if you're having a conversation with someone, because we don't think in syllogisms. We think in fuzzy syllogisms at best. And so the Informal Logic one teaches you a little bit more about how to recognize certain phrases and issues in common conversation. It's not one that was instructive so much for me. By the time I found it, I was looking for this book to give to others as a way of explaining how I do some of what I do. And so that was what I handed out. Now, there are a lot of books from the atheist community at large. I'm stacking them up next to me now. And there's tons of them that I love to recommend. And the first one is actually by a friend of mine who we had on Nonprofits once upon a time. This is Guy P. Harrison's 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God. While I love The God Delusion and all the many of the other books written specifically by atheists, this one is perhaps the most approachable and accessible book that you're going to find on the subject. And while I have a disagreement about one particular story in here, which we talked about on the Nonprofits, I'm not going to beat it up, because what he does is chapter 10, believing in my God makes me happy. So here's something that somebody actually believes, and then he goes through and basically writes a little essay about how and why that's not a good reason to believe. So 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God by Guy P. Harrison. The next one is by someone who has unfortunately passed away, although I was honored to have him record an episode of Nonprofits right in my tiny little apartment. And that is Victor Stinger's book, God, the Failed Hypothesis, How Science Shows That God Does Not Exist. Now, I've pointed out many times before that I'm not sure that God necessarily rises to the level of being a proper hypothesis. And depending on the definition of God, it may in fact be not testable. But to whatever extent it is testable, Vic went through everything that was as close to testable about the God hypothesis and showing how it is completely inconsistent with the world in which we habit. So to the extent that we could show that God exists or doesn't exist, it shows that God doesn't exist. And everything outside of that is something that's an unfalsifiable proposition, which you shouldn't accept anyway. That's one of my all-time favorites. I'm going to recommend a book by Bart Ehrman. I like Bart. I like his work. I was honored to moderate a debate between him and Bob Price. And the book I'm going to recommend is not Misquoting Jesus, which is the book that, made Bart almost a household name. The book I'm going to recommend is called Lost Christianities, The Battles for Scripture and Faiths We Never Knew. It is a look at all of the different types of Christianity, and that's why he says Christianities, that didn't become Christianity. The books that didn't get into Scripture, the ones, the beliefs and the battles that took place, arguing over, was Jesus fully man, fully God, both, things like that, but also plenty of texts that were considered inspired. Like I like to reference the Shepherd of Hermas and others. And this is my favorite of Bart's books because I think it gets away from the standard biblical notion to show you what it was like in the first few centuries when people were trying to piece together this religion. I'll recommend almost any book by Dan Dennett. If you're looking to study things on free will or whatever else, then there's Elbow Room and Consciousness Explained and everything else. This is one of his newer books. It's called Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking. It is a kind of walkthrough of how to think about and how to assess different types of problems. It's a legitimate tool set to help people think more clearly. And I thoroughly enjoyed that one. I have two books by Carl Sagan. What are you going to guess what the first one is? Oh, you're absolutely right. The Demon Haunted World. And the full title of the book is The Demon Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. And while Carl Sagan wasn't as outspoken or perhaps as vehement as I am on religion, he spoke about it quite often. And science as a candle in the dark is really this notion that as we flounder around trying to discover the world, the only thing that has produced consistently reliable, accurate information about the world are the methods that we fold into science. And in response to a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience, Carl Sagan also wrote a book called The Varieties of Scientific Experience. It is a collection of his essays edited by his wife, his various essays and speeches about religion. I loved reading it, highly recommended, because so many of us, you guys are getting information from me or somebody on YouTube or Richard Dawkins or whatever. It's nice to have other sources as well so that you can come at it from a slightly different approach. I only have one more book that really, truly touches on religion. Probably won't be a surprise to anybody. It's a huge book. But it's Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined. While it isn't perfect, and I know there are things to be corrected, and I think even Dr. Pinker's touched on some of those, it is a good modern book to let you know that despite what you see on the news, despite the news sensationalizing all of the things that are going wrong in the world and how we're all going to hell in a handbasket, that the world, we actually live at the best of all possible times and things are just consistently getting better. I don't know if there'll be an addendum to cover 2020 or not. I have one more book that you may not be able to find, and that's okay because you don't actually need the book. And I include this for two reasons. This is the companion book to a video series by James Burke called The Day the Universe Changed. There are two series, you can see Dr. Burke on the back. There are two series of videos that he did. One is The Day the Universe Changed, and the other one is Connections. Now, he did a Connections 2, Connections 3, there's follow-ups. But the first one, Connections and The Day the Universe Changed, were videos that were more impactful on my life than Cosmos, than almost anything. I look forward to someday thanking Dr. Burke, and because we have a mutual friend, that's entirely possible. But The Day the Universe Changed and Connections, I'm not so much recommending that you go find the book as that you just download and order the DVDs. There's a DVD box set for each of those, one for The Day the Universe Changed and one for Connections. I own them both, but since I was doing books, I didn't want to bring them out. But by all means, look those up. And people constantly ask me, what are you reading now, Matt? Well, the truth is, not much. I'm incredibly busy. And when I do sit down to read, I tend to prefer fiction. And so I thought it would be a fun little addition, since I've given you all a whole bunch of homework to go look into for those of you who are interested. I thought I'd talk about a couple of books, two specific books that start a series. And first of all, one type of book. This was a gift to me. I have several of these in different forms, not the same book, but the same type of book, all from Martin Gardner and other. This is the Scientific American Book of Mathematical Puzzles and Diversions. It's, oh, look, there's actual text. But yes, there are puzzles, diversions, games, things like that, all that were published in the Scientific American. I have a number of different these, including I have the big book by Martin Gardner. But I recommend this because even if you can just find like a copy of Games Magazine or something that's going to go through logic puzzles, training to solve logic puzzles or learning a game like chess goes a long way outside of those realms, because what you're thinking about when you do this is seeking patterns, anticipating what's likely to happen, and coming up with the best answer, not just a right answer or a good answer, but the best answer. I love that. These last two are fiction. You can take them or leave them. I'm not saying these are the best ever. I'm going to start with, I don't keep many paperbacks. Almost all the books that I have, fiction books that I really like, I have them in hardcover. But I kept this series of paperbacks because I don't think these exist in hardcover. And if they do, I'd love to know about it. The first one is called Sword Dancer by Jennifer Roberson. And it is a full-on series of books that I just happened upon while I was in the Navy, read the first one, and it's a love story, a fantasy story. It's just really good and gives you an insight into the type of things that I at least once enjoyed. I haven't read this one in years and years, but I kept it, and it's one of the only paperback series that I kept. The other paperback series that I kept, apart from a couple of Piers Anthony books from the Incarnations of Immortality series, is this one, which is probably my favorite fiction book of all time. It's called The Man Who Never Missed by Steve Perry, and it is a full-on series of books. I have another one here. I started rereading the series recently. This is Matadora, which is another book in the series. I started rereading it because I think this book may have had an impact on the young Christian me that led to atheism, that led to acceptance of things that I was told were sinful, whether it be gender issues, sexuality issues. But this also goes into detail on governments, on economic policies. This series is outstanding, but this book alone, just reading the story of Emil Antun Kadaji, The Man Who Never Missed, I enjoyed reading this every time I've read it, including just a couple months ago when I restarted the series for the first time in a decade or two. And so for all the people that asked, there's my quickie list of book recommendations. Take them or leave them. Remember that you don't have to go out and pick up books. You have the internet. That Wikipedia is a great starting place, but if you're going to go to Wikipedia to research stuff, follow the footnotes, because for philosophical discussions and logical discussions, they will take you out to the educational institutions where you will find better papers and be able to go more in depth on the things that you want to learn. Anyway, I appreciate everybody for watching through. Find the books that you like. Read a book every now and then. But if you're not a reader, I don't think that you should feel bad about it. A lot of people do this. Oh, well, I don't watch TV. I just read books. Okay. Well, that's fine. But I've seen some amazing documentaries, and I've learned amazing things from YouTube and Netflix. Let's stop pretending that I'm not reading just because I happen to be reading on my cell phone. I'm still reading news as if it were a newspaper. I'm still reading scholarly articles as if I had printed them out myself. I get that there's some really resonating thing about having a tangible physical book that you can hold. I enjoy that too on occasion. But once upon a time when I walked into somebody's house, if they didn't have any books, it felt weird. Like I've always been surrounded by books. Well, there's 5 bookshelves downstairs and more of them up here, and there's more along these walls here. I have lots and lots of books. But apart from a few keepsake books, I could probably get rid of all these books and survive just fine and still be learning things all the time. Hopefully you will too. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.